I'm Mark Fernandez, professor of history. I teach early American and Southern history, and I also teach in our first year experience. Well, the first year experience has a lot of goals. We want to help in our transition for students so that they make a smoother transition from high school to college. It's a very different world in college, and we understand that. We also want to use the first year experience to introduce students more directly to our mission at Loyola, our Ignatian mission of educating the whole person. The Jesuits call it cura personalis. Also, our whole culture of community outreach. A lot of our first year experience deals with service projects and so forth. And as an overarching theme for the first year experience, we focus on the concepts of thinking critically, acting justly. That's an intellectual way to speak to our Ignatian mission. Well, critical thinking means a lot of different things. There are different kinds of critical thinking in all different disciplines. There's a slightly different approach to critical thinking in philosophy and history than there would be in some of the sciences, because the sciences require a different kind of data analysis and data gathering. But the same principles are there, principles of acquiring information, analyzing that information, and publishing that information in the form of some kind of argument. In my classes, which are centered in history, we do that through oral expression and through writing. We write papers. We struggle a lot to think about how we can measure just action. And in my mind, the most important aspect of acting justly, and the reason we infuse our first year experience with that concept, is we're trying to build people who are going to be great individuals, who are going to be just acting individuals, not only in college, but in 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. We want them to look back at Loyola and say, this is a place that instilled certain values in me, and one of the most important value is justice. It's hard to measure, but it's not hard to inform a variety of different courses. Thinking critically is part of acting justly. So the two are intimately linked together. If we can train students who become better critical thinkers, they will make better decisions, not just in college, but throughout their entire lives. I do two seminars in our first year experience. One is a course on New Orleans, Crescent City People, which explores the people and culture of New Orleans. It's odd, first couple times I taught it, the students in the course tended to come from other parts of the country. This year I seem to have mostly students from New Orleans who want to learn more about their city, so that's kind of fun. The other course I do is American Heroes, and in American Heroes what we discuss are the types of people that Americans have made heroes over time, and how changes in American attitudes and values have reshaped the concept of how we think about our heroes, who we identify with as heroes. Sometimes heroes are in, sometimes they're out. Columbus, Andrew Jackson. These are very complex people who at certain times in American history have been widely valued as heroes. In our more contemporary times, they give us pause. First and foremost, in the first year experience, in the first year seminars, which are part of our common curriculum, this is a goal of the entire common curriculum, we want to help our students become better at oral expression. So the seminars especially are a good vehicle for that, because we do a lot of short readings and then discuss them in class. So our classes are primarily 50 to 75% discussion as opposed to lecture courses. We do lectures sometimes. So we try to create a friendly, sharing environment. And one of the things about Loyola that I think is important, might separate us from some other schools, is that we want intellectuals who argue passionately about the things they believe in. But we are also a Jesuit Catholic institution, and we value and we have a tremendous amount of empathy for others. So I like to create a situation where folks are comfortable discussing views, where folks are comfortable disagreeing with one another, disagreeing with the teacher, they're good at that, and try to make it a friendly, sharing environment, but keep the discourse at a fairly high level. I like to challenge my students. I tell them all in all of my classes, not just the first year classes, that they are historians in this class, that historians aren't people with a bunch of letters after their name, They are historians too, and they need to take that very seriously. And we talk a lot about the ethics of doing history. I think the academic process can be humbling. I think it should be humbling. Years ago, we were doing a college-wide study about retention, and we were talking about student satisfaction. Of course, we want the students to be satisfied with their experience, but one of the tasks of the teacher is sometimes make the student uncomfortable. And I actually like that part, and I try to do it in a friendly way. But I do like to challenge my students' ideas, and I like them to challenge mine, and I encourage them to do that. I think anyone who is a scholar and has gone through the process of producing scholarships becomes keenly aware of their own limitations as a scholar. You know your weaknesses probably better than your strengths when you're doing serious scholarly work. And so early on in my career, I learned the most important response to any question can be, I don't know. I don't know the answer. That's more important than sometimes the bluster we put out there when we encounter difficult questions. So I think good scholars, by nature, are humble. And I think our students see that in the way we interact. Every year, we put out a call for proposals to faculty to create first-year seminars. And so we'd like the faculty to come at the seminars from their own interests and their own scholarly perspectives. And we like them to root the seminars in their own disciplines, but the seminars are also interdisciplinary. So we ask them to conceive of topics that cut across disciplines. And if you look at, you can see it in the title of our courses. My course, Crescent City People, is not just about the history of New Orleans, but about the people and their culture, and it bridges the gap between history and anthropology, literature, music, art, all aspects of cultural studies. We have a wonderful course on the atomic bomb that's coming out of our physics class, our physics department. But it's not just a physics course about how the bomb works. It's about the implications of creating nuclear weapons and those implications in terms of international diplomacy, war, and the kind of humility that's brought to the human race in realizing its own frailties and its own fragility. New Orleans is one of the great places to study culture because we are such an amalgam of cultures. We started out as a vital part of what scholars call the Atlantic world. We were founded in the period of exploration and conquest, for good or ill. That's where our city came from. And in its very beginnings, it was a Creole crossroad. In fact, that's one of our first year seminars, Creole Crossroads. My colleague Judith Hunt teaches that course. But it was a real crossroad of the world. It was a place where Native Americans, Africans, French and Spanish settlers, German settlers all came together from the very beginning. A strong Caribbean element was evident at the founding of Louisiana and in the city of New Orleans. So it starts out with this great amalgam of cultures, and that has only grown through the eras. After the Louisiana Purchase, there was a tremendous infusion of Anglo-Americans, which added richness and depth to the culture. In the 19th century, there was an infusion of Irish and German and Sicilian immigrants to New Orleans, all adding new layers to the cultural mix. In the 20th century, we've had tremendous infusion of immigrants from Latin America in New Orleans, and more recently from Asia as well. So we had, and after Katrina, a new infusion from Latin America in the form of a lot of folks who came to work in the service industries and the rebuilding of New Orleans. So our culture is probably more complex and nuanced than most. And so it's one of the reasons why New Orleans is a great laboratory, not only to study culture, but cultural interaction. Yeah, I think New Orleans certainly shares in the American experience, the American immigrant experience and the multicultural experience of America. But I think New Orleans, sort of does that cubed. It's even more diverse. And it's one of the things that makes our culture so interesting. It's evident in all aspects of our culture. Our music is diverse. Jazz combines African American ideas, Latin ideas of music, American ideas of music, and it creates this fusion. And that's one of the great art forms to come of age in America, and its roots are here in New Orleans, and I think that's kind of indicative. You can see it in our cuisine, in our gumbos, which are extremely diverse and have African, Native American, and European aspects to them. There's nothing more multicultural than a gumbo or a jambalaya. I think our everyday life in New Orleans is a reflection of this fusion of cultures, and I think that's something really important for Loyola students to understand. A lot of our students tell us they picked Loyola partially because of its location, partially because of the allure of the city of New Orleans. And because of that, I think we have a responsibility as professors and as a university to open their eyes to what that really means. It's not Bourbon Street, and that's not really what New Orleans culture is all about. It's not the seamy side that you might see on certain TV shows. Those things do exist, but New Orleans is so much more. My students are currently at work on a project in my New Orleans course where they're reading a cookbook as one of their assignments. The cookbook by Elsa Hahn is called You Are Where You Eat. And it's a wonderful cookbook. Every chapter is based on a New Orleans neighborhood. The recipes come from people who live in the neighborhood, and the recipes are preceded by an oral history interview with the people from these neighborhoods. One of the things that's really evident is the multicultural flavor of New Orleans. The recipes aren't all gumbos and jambalayas. There's pho from the Vietnamese community. There's German cooking. There's Hungarian cooking. All of these things are part of our culture. And you may not see that if your experience with New Orleans is on a postcard or on television. But when you get here, it becomes certainly one of the most recognizable things about our community. So my students are working with that cookbook and developing essentially a paper that's also going to be part of an oral presentation where they're putting together a menu for a dinner party, and they have to educate their guest about the history and culture of the neighborhoods and the cuisines that are featured in their 5-course meal. So they're having a lot of fun with that, and I am too. The first year experience is designed to make the first year not only an intellectually stimulating one, but to help equip students with all of the tools they need to succeed in college. We have a diverse co-curricular program. We do a lot of cultural programming at Loyola, a lot of talks and lectures from prominent individuals from across the country, musical performances, plays, art exhibits. In fact, we have a great art exhibit right now up in our gallery in the library by our university photographer, Harold Baquet. And so there's a lot of cultural programming going on at Loyola, as much or more than I've seen in any other university I've been affiliated with. And we want our students to take part in those events. So there are co-curricular components where they go to those events outside of the classroom. They write papers or do reflections on those. We have discussions in class as well. That's a little bit more different than, say, the freshman math course and what it's intended to do. So this co-curricular experience, this holistic approach to Loyola and to education is something that's very important about the first year experience. The other thing about the first year experience that's very important and makes it different from all of our other courses, and maybe different from a lot of courses across the country, is that in order to teach in our first year experience, all faculty have to attend a faculty academy in the summer. It's a 3-week course run by faculty about the best practices of teaching freshmen, which they're kind of different animals, about advising responsibilities, about the interdisciplinary scope of the course, and about creating great assignments. So one of the things that differs, I think, in terms of the first year seminars and the rest of our curriculum is that they're getting not only the best and the brightest of the Loyola faculty, but they're getting them after they've had significant additional training. Nobody trains college professors how to teach. We become experts in our fields, we live in libraries, and then they throw us out into the classroom. Some of us make it and some of us don't, and we succeed at varying degrees. The Faculty Academy is a place where we can all bring what we've learned and our expertise to the table and learn from each other. So there's a more creative layer of pedagogy in those first year classes. The other thing we do a really good job in those classes is teaching our students, as part of thinking critically and acting justly, how to write And we just did a survey. We did a study of our students, a focus group of students who took the first year seminars against those who didn't take first year seminars. And the ones who did scored significantly higher in their ability to make an argument, which is one of the most important skills you can get out of college. Yes, there's a very different sense of community amongst the students. Some of it is actually part of the planning that goes into the first year experience. We think about their residential housing and the courses they're taking. So the students in the residence hall are assigned rooms based on their first year seminar choices. So if we have all the students who are taking the fall seminars living in one residence hall, all the students who are taking the spring courses living in another. So the students are living in the same residence hall as everyone else in their class, and a good component of their freshman class who are going through many of the same things. The co-curricular activities I was talking about are usually assigned by multiple classes. So the students are seeing friends in their residence hall that they're seeing at the cultural events. They have something in common, something they can talk about right away, especially in that first year of college when making friends is so important. So that's an aspect of the courses that is stronger than you might find at other universities and in other programs. The other aspect of the culture for the students is that one of the things we're trained to do in the Faculty Academy is develop a stronger sense of cohesion with our students in our seminars. We do it in a variety of ways. Part of it's just letting them know that we're there to advise them on issues that they might encounter in their first year and welcoming them to come talk to us about those things. But also we go to those co-curricular events, and we also do events for our own seminars after hours. We don't like to think of the first year seminar as existing on Tuesday and Thursday from 9:30 to 10:45. We like to think of it as an experience that goes beyond the four walls of the classroom. So we have, I often have movie nights with my students where we have food and we watch a movie relevant to the class and we discuss it and we get to know each other a little bit better, and we try to pick fun movies. My course on New Orleans, for example, this is probably a little bit of malpractice, but one of the movies I'm showing them this semester is Abbott and Costello on Mars, which is a comedy. Abbott and Costello, comedy team from the 1950s. They think they're going up into space, and they end up landing in New Orleans at Mardi Gras time, and they think they're on Mars, and they think the people of New Orleans are aliens. So it's fun, but and it's probably not the most intellectually stimulating thing you'll ever see, but it can lead to really important teachable moments. I would like my students to be transformed by the experience in a variety of ways. Intellectually, I'd like them to understand that they're playing in a different league when they come to college, and that college requires a different level of rigor. The classes are harder, the classes are more rigorous, the classes delve into questions more deeply and ask more significant questions. They're not just here to acquire a bunch of knowledge and go out and get a job. I want our students to take the thinking critically, acting justly aspect of our program very seriously and learn some important life lessons in those classes and make responsible choices both as students and as adults. My goal is to hear back from those students in 30 years and say, I had some really grown-up decisions to make, and my time at Loyola really helped me make the right choices. I really want that to happen, so I wanted to transform them in those ways. I also want my course to introduce my students to the life of being an intellectual. You come to college to be an intellectual. And that's something we lose sight of in modern education because it's so universal, and especially at large state universities, it's all about moving students through a program in an orderly fashion. But the reason you come to college is to be part of a college, a community of scholars. Historically, the university grew up as professors and students sitting in the library learning from one another, and that's what I want to make my seminars and all of my classes actually like. I want the students to understand we're part of an enterprise and we're equal parts of that enterprise, and that it's their responsibility to plug into that enterprise and become intellectuals. Well, the characteristics of an intellectual, first and foremost, I think the most important responsibility of the intellectual is to be a social critic, not necessarily in a negative way. Criticism can come in all forms. To be a social critic, you have to be informed, and you have to be informed at an extremely high level. For my students, I want them to be informed about history, not only about the history that we might study in a particular class, but how to study history, and to make that a part of their thought process for the rest of their lives. I want them to evaluate things in a historical way. How did we get to this problem? How can we avoid making the mistakes we've made in the past? How can we learn from the past to make a better future? So I think that's part of the responsibility of the intellectual, being a social critic, and I think it's the number one duty of the intellectual. The other duty of the intellectual is to move toward becoming an expert on something, becoming an expert in college on how to study. That's really what we teach, and our students should graduate knowing how to study. Knowing the basics of how to think. That's much more important than having a degree that will open a door to a particular job. That's not what college is all about. They can expand those skills and direct them in graduate school, in law school, in the jobs they get, in the careers they take on, the training they get in those careers. But we need to get them to a point where they're ready to go out into the world. Yeah, I have learned how to be a teacher over the years. As I said before, nobody trains you to be a teacher in graduate school. I trained to be a historian. I trained to use archives and to write and speak based on those materials. But I didn't learn how to be a teacher in any directed way. But I did learn a lot in college about being a teacher because I had great teachers. To me, the great teachers are accessible. They're people who are in their offices with their doors open and who invite you in with a smile and have you sit down, put you at ease, and talk about their subject. I love to talk about history with my students. I don't want them just coming to my office with problems and advising. I want them to come in and talk about the paper they're writing for my class or somebody else's class. So that kind of rapport, I think, is important to being a great teacher. This other aspect of being a great teacher is to be effective in the classroom, and that can be done in a variety of ways, and different people might find that they are more successful in some ways than in others. Some are great lecturers. Some are very creative in terms of putting together assignments. Some are very good at collaborative learning and creating collaborative learning exercises for their students. Some really, and this is my approach, I try to do a variety of things and approaches to pedagogy in my classes because I think all students respond in different ways. So for one student, they really might want the good lecture, and I try to introduce every section of the course with a very solid lecture. And I think I'm a pretty good lecturer. I'm a good storyteller. I love stories. I like to write about people. I like the oddball stuff that catches your attention. So I come up with that, and I use a lot of humor in my classes. More and more I've learned to use more visual aids, something I didn't do a lot of as a young scholar. I try not to go overboard and have bells and whistles. I don't want that in my class. But I do like to engage students with things like a short YouTube video. Yesterday in my Crescent City People class, we were talking about the complexities of the Creole culture in Louisiana and some of the historic aspects of slavery that helped bring about that culture and some of the conflicts that emerged out of that culture. And I used a poem in that at the beginning of class by Louisiana's poet laureate Brenda Marie Osby. It's a poem called "The Head of Luis Congo Speaks." And Luis Congo was a character who was an executioner after the 1811 slave revolt in Louisiana, largest slave revolt in American history. And it created an odd situation where an African American was executing African American slaves who revolted. And it's a marvelously complex poem. So picking up on something I learned in a presentation by one of our English professors, we took lines of that poem. I had groups of students work on them to figure out what they thought it meant. And then we discussed it as a whole, and then we saw, first and foremost, the complexity of that. I think a lot of students realized just how wonderful poetry is from that class. But then there were so many historical aspects and parts of this historical event in the history of Louisiana that I could then bring into the discussion. By the time I did that, the students were engaged because they had played with this poem and had so much fun with it. Freshman year, I was a business major. I was going to college to get a job. And I took a required history course and had a great professor who engaged me in the topic mostly by telling good stories. He was a great lecturer, and he had a great way if you met him, you wouldn't think he would be a great lecturer. He's very soft-spoken and mild-mannered, but his lecture style was different. He put on a different persona, and he had a great way of emphasizing words. You know, he would talk about a peasant revolt and the nobleman's desire to suppress the revolt, and he'd say, and then he throttled them, you know, and it would just wake you up, even if you'd had a long night the night before. And he gave these great absorbing lectures, and that sort of drew me to take some more history classes and become a history major. And then in my sophomore year, in one of my upper-level history courses, I encountered a professor named Tom Schlunz. Unfortunately, he passed away very suddenly a couple years ago. And Tom was a medievalist, and he was the first professor I had who made us encounter primary documents, real sources, historical sources. And reading the words of the people from the past really inspired me. I was hooked. It was like an addictive drug to read these documents and the way it made me feel. I just wanted more and more and more of that. And I became a much more serious student, and I decided in my sophomore year of college that I wanted to go on and become a history professor. So I made my decision very early, mainly from encountering good teachers and good documents. And I worked with Tom on my senior thesis, so for 2 years we worked very closely together. And he really introduced me to the rigor and complexity of doing history. I was studying medieval England, and he made it very clear that I had not only to get a grasp of Latin, but I had to really learn Latin and read Latin and be able to use it. So by the time I was a senior, I was able to read microfilm of actual historical, handwritten historical documents in Latin, and also published material of original sources in the Latin. So I got to work with that at a very young age. That's not the normal undergraduate experience, but it was what I wanted to do, and it was what my passion was. And I tease my students and tell them that when I was in college, my wife and I married my college sweetheart. My wife and I would date. We'd go out every Friday night on a date, but before our dates would start in the library. We'd work, from 7 to maybe 10 o'clock in the library, studying, working on our projects. Then we would go out and have a good time. They look at me now like I'm crazy because we did that, but that's what the passion for a subject can do. You teach music, and the musicians, they wake up in the morning and they grab their instruments. It's so much a part of what they do. History's like that for me and for my colleagues, and we want our students to experience that. I don't want every student I teach to go to grad school. In fact, I encourage some not to go to grad school, and I don't think they're really cut out for it. But if they can find that passion and it can fulfill them in the way it's fulfilled me, I only wish them the best, and I want to help them find their way. I think historical awareness helps us be better persons because history deals with the injustices that have plagued humankind from its earliest origins. And the more we study that, I think the more we can empathize with other human beings, both those of the past and the ones we encounter in our daily lives and the people we read about in far corners of the earth. One of our English professors teaches African American literature, and she is very involved in the contemporary anti-slavery movement. And this fall she brought a former slave to speak about his experiences in Africa. And it engaged a lot of our students, and many of them have joined the cause. So, the history of slavery in both its more abstract ways and in meeting someone who escaped slavery has really inspired a lot of our students to social justice. We have modern day abolitionists. In fact, we have pictures of them throughout Beauvais Hall, the ones who've joined the cause. So I think learning history and understanding the injustices of the past makes us better people. As for citizenship, I think understanding history is one of our most basic responsibilities. I don't think you can make responsible choices at the ballot box in terms of your own civic engagement if you don't have a good historical background. And let's face it, politics has become quite a bit of a circus. It always has been, but it's probably reaching some new lows with that, with some, the soundbite commercials that are basically all we have to go on unless we dig a little deeper. Well, I want all of my students to understand that they have to dig deeper. I also think history makes a better citizen because in studying revolutions and studying constitutional history and studying the injustices and inequalities over time, I think students can become more aware that it's their most significant responsibility to be an educated person and to make educated choices, because if not, that's when evil occurs. That's one of my great joys, has always been running into students after they've graduated, sometimes 10, 15 years down the road. It's always inspiring, and they're always so complimentary about their time at Loyola, and they're very generous about telling you how you influenced their lives. And that's pretty heady wine when somebody tells you, you changed my life. It makes you feel good about what you do. And it's not something you see all the time. One of the real exciting aspects of that has been social media. I got on Facebook several years ago simply to make contact with incoming freshmen who were going to be in my seminar, and it seemed to be what the kids were doing. But one of the real benefits is I've had a lot of former students look me up and come back, and we've gotten back in touch, and we stay in touch in that way. And it's so wonderful to be a part of their lives once they leave Loyola. I mean, it's a shame so often they graduate and you never see them again. But the good ones will seek you out, and it's really been wonderful. It's humbling to have somebody tell you at the age of 35 or 40, that you had an impact on their lives, and an important one, and you were perhaps one of the most important influences in their lives. I think it makes you more aware of your responsibilities, and teaching is a great responsibility. It has been one of the great shocks, actually, in my life of being a professor. I wanted to be a college professor because I loved history, and I wanted to be a historian because I loved to write. And this was a way to support yourself as a writer and not be a starving artist as well. So it was a wonderful combination of things. But I never really thought about teaching. I knew I'd have to do it, and I didn't really embrace it at first. And then when I started teaching my own classes in graduate school, I found that I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. And it's become now a much more important aspect of my life. I work really hard at trying to be a better teacher. Being a historian and teaching history, it's part of being a historian. But yes, I mean, I do original research, I write books and articles, I'm always engaged in scholarship. I go to conferences and give papers. I sit on committees for graduate students in schools outside of the Loyola community. I'm part of a community of scholars. It's part of what I do. And fortunately, at Loyola, we're large enough, without being too big, that we have a good critical mass of scholars. We have a good history department. We have enough professors who are able to teach in their specialties. So the things I teach relate very closely to the things I write about. At some smaller liberal arts schools, you might have a history department of only 4 people, and they have to teach a wide array of courses, often outside of their area of expertise. And at Loyola, you get to stay within that level of expertise, but then through our first year seminar and our common curriculum, you can develop your own interest a little bit more in more creative ways. And because we are a service department and we teach world civilizations, one of our freshman courses that's required of all freshmen, I started teaching that a few years ago, and it takes me far out of my comfort zone. But it has done a wonderful job of sort of redirecting my analysis to a more global perspective. So the teaching informs the scholarship informs the teaching. It's really a holistic kind of thing. It's not something you can separate and say, this is 25% and this is 25%. It's just part of what we do. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I teach a lot of school teachers in the summer. The Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities has a Summer Teacher Institute program, and I've directed several of those. And then the United States Department of Education has a Teaching American History program. I've taught maybe 3 summer seminars for teachers in that. And I think it becomes you become keenly aware in those seminars that the way you live your life is part of teaching. And one of the funny things I learned from the public school teachers is that for a while there were rules and regulations against something called bird dogging. They weren't supposed to talk about their personal experiences. They were only supposed to teach math or history, and that's all they would do. And I just didn't understand that, because there's so many things from my personal life that make me able to make a connection with students on a personal level, and then use that to draw them into a complex historical problem that, I don't know what I would do without it. So yeah, my personal experiences certainly do play a part. I try not to make them confessional in any way in the classroom. I usually try to make them humorous and get the students hooked on some boneheaded thing I did or somebody in my family did, and then use that to talk about George Washington and his problem. And if you can connect with them on the personal level and then bring them into the more abstract, I think it makes them more willing to come with you on that journey. The most important thing for a student to know about our first year seminar program is that they have the ability to choose their seminar. And they get a tremendous amount of paperwork when they enroll in Loyola, and it's often very confusing. And I think a lot of them don't make their choices and end up getting put into a random seminar. And I don't think that's the best way to experience the program. You might be delighted, but you might also find yourself in a course that you're not particularly interested in. And we have such a wide variety of courses. I can't believe there isn't something out there that a student might be interested in. If you're interested in New Orleans, we have 5 or 6 different courses on New Orleans. They can pick and choose which ones they want. So I think it's really important for the incoming freshmen to select the courses they want. And I think they'll have a better experience in the first year seminar with that. I also think it's a time for them to assert some independence from their parents and take the course they want to take, not the one their parent might want to take or thinks is interesting. So it's really important. Unfortunately, one of the things we don't do very well, I think, is we give a slice of our first year experience to the parents of the incoming freshmen and the students. They come into Nunemaker Hall, one of our big auditoriums, and either me or Robert Bell or Melanie McKay or Judith Hunt will give a little slice of what a class is like. And I think a lot of times the parents become interested in that particular class, and then they're kind of, I've had several come up with their children after the section saying, make sure Johnny is in your seminar. We want him to be, and I wonder how much Johnny really wants to be in that seminar, or how much mom and dad want Johnny to be in that seminar. And this is time to assert your independence. College is a very independent part of it. College is a way of learning how to be independent in your life. And I think you need to start with registering for courses, and you need to take the first year seminar that looks interesting to you.